If you've ever sat at a family dinner, knowing you were one sentence away from breaking, then you already understand the air that wrapped around me that night. My father's voice kept echoing sharp as a cracked plate. "A broke seller. That's all she is." My brother chuckled like he was agreeing out of habit, not thought. My mother didn't correct them. And I just sat there, my hands under the table nails digging into my palm, praying no one noticed how hard I was gripping myself together. What none of them knew not yet was that something had happened that morning, something big enough to blow their entire narrative to pieces. But before that truth arrived, I had to survive the longest dinner of my life. The night started quietly enough, the way Tennessee evenings tend to crickets outside the windows, warm lamplight in my grandmother's dining room, the smell of her Sunday roast drifting through the air. This was the first full family dinner we'd had in months, and I already regretted RSVPing yes. I was 28, still treated like the child who never figured life out. To them, I was the one who'd refused a stable office job, the one who sold handmade skincare products from my small shed behind the house. A hobby, they called it. A phase, something I would grow out of. My father settled into the head seat like he was presiding over a board meeting, chin, lifted sleeves rolled tie, perfectly knotted, even though no one else there was dressed up. My brother Brandon sat beside him, Mr. Real Estate Investor who believed that any career not tied to stocks or property was a waste of oxygen. His fiancée Grace sat beside him, new to the family dynamic, trying her best to look pleasant, polite, unbothered. She was the only one who actually asked me about my day, but even she didn't know what had happened to me that morning. I hadn't told her. I hadn't told anyone. Grandma took her seat, last slow, steady eyes sharp. She'd always seen through me faster than I liked. She patted my hand when she sat down, and I felt the warmth move through me like a reminder that someone, at least one person, was on my side. We were halfway through the meal when the first jab landed. My father lifted his wine glass and said in that booming voice he used when he wanted everyone to hear Brandon closed 3 deals this month, "Impressive, son." Then he turned to me, lips tightening in something between pity and annoyance. "And how's your selling going, sweetheart?" The table shifted. Even the silverware seemed to pause. He knew exactly what he was doing. "I'm doing all right," I said, steady, careful. "Orders have been picking up." My mother made a soft little sigh, one of those dramatic ones people use when they want you to hear their disappointment. "Well," she said gently, "everyone needs a hobby." Brandon snorted. "Stocks are better." I put down my fork. "I'm not doing a hobby." "Right," he laughed. "You're what do you call it again? A maker, an artisan." He dragged out the word like it was silly. "Selling jars of creams from your shed." He turned to Dad. "Hey, Dad, at least she's entrepreneurial." My father shook his head. "It's unstable. She should consider a real career." It hit me harder than it should have, maybe because I'd worked until 4 in the morning for months, maybe because I'd poured every paycheck and ounce of myself into my brand, maybe because they weren't wrong about how hard it had been, maybe because part of me wanted just once to be seen. But that morning had changed everything, and I wasn't ready to tell them. Not yet. My grandmother cleared her throat. "She's doing just fine." She didn't raise her voice. She never had to, but Dad ignored her. "I just don't understand why a girl with your grades, your potential, would choose to live like this. Struggling, barely making anything." I swallowed hard. "I'm not struggling." "Sweetheart," my mother whispered, reaching to touch my hand. "We know. That hurt more than the insults." I gently pulled my hand away. Brandon leaned back, arms crossed. "If you want financial stability, you should do what I do. Invest. Stop chasing dreams." Dreams. He said it was like a diagnosis. I opened my mouth to respond, to push back in a way I'd never allowed myself before, but before I could speak, Grace leaned in slightly, studying my face with an intensity I didn't understand yet. Then she asked softly, "You've been quiet tonight. Are you okay?" I nodded, but she didn't believe me. I could see it. She kept watching me with that same strange expression, as if she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. I didn't know then what she had recognized, but I was about to. My father sighed dramatically and went on, "I just want what's best for you. You can't live hand to mouth forever. Selling soaps and oils isn't the future." That was when I finally said it. I don't sell soaps and oils. I own a brand." He waved a hand. "A brand, a business, whatever you want to call it. It's not sustainable." The words landed like a slap. And then without warning, Grace stiffened beside Brandon. Her eyes widened just a little, so small no one else caught it. But I did. She leaned forward, whispering almost silently, almost like she couldn't believe what she was asking. "Wait, your brand isn't called Willow and Fern, is it?" The room froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stared at her. "What?" She swallowed, then whispered again, barely audible. "Because Willow and Fern is on the cover of Vogue next month." Brandon stopped breathing. My mother's fork slipped. My father froze like stone. And Grace wasn't done. She leaned closer, eyes huge, voice trembling. "Please tell me you're not saying you're the founder." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The shock in her voice carried across the entire table, wrapping every last member of my family in silence. And in that suspended moment between who they thought I was and what they were about to find out, my entire life shifted. Everything they had ever said about me, every dismissal, every scoffed broke seller, every doubt, all of it began to crack. And the truth they never saw coming was finally, inevitably, on its way to the surface. Grace kept staring at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle she suddenly realized she'd seen before. Her fingers tightened around her napkin, and she leaned even closer, voice barely steady. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "Are you the founder of Willow and Fern?" I didn't answer. My breath caught somewhere between my spine and my throat. The room felt too small, too bright, too loud in all the wrong places, even though no one was speaking. My father broke first. "What is she talking about?" He looked at me, then at Grace, then back at me again, as if someone had thrown a foreign language into the middle of the dinner table. Founder of what Grace didn't look away from me. "Willow and Fern." She repeated this time louder enough for everyone to hear. "The clean beauty brand everyone's been posting about, the one Vogue selected for their Southern Creators Spotlight series." Brandon blinked hard like he'd missed a punch he should have seen coming. That brand... That thing everyone keeps talking about on social media." Mom's hand froze midway to her wine glass. "I thought that was some big company from Charleston," she said weakly. Grace shook her head. "It's small, independent, handcrafted, but the buzz is huge." She swallowed. "There's a rumor the founder's identity wasn't public yet, that it's a woman in Tennessee using botanical formulations." My heart hammered so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Dad frowned like he was still trying to force the facts into the narrative he wanted. "Hold on, none of this makes sense. She's been selling out of her shed. Lots of indie brands start like that," Grace whispered, almost apologetic. "The question is," she turned fully toward me, "is it you?" The air slipped out of my lungs. "Yes," I finally said. Just one syllable, but it hit the table like a dropped plate. Dad's mouth fell open. Mom pressed a hand to her chest. Brandon looked as if the chair beneath him had tilted. And Grandma, who had been watching silently, let out a long, slow breath as though she'd been waiting for the truth to arrive on its own timetable. "I knew it," she murmured. Dad wasn't ready to process it. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're telling me our daughter created a brand that's on Vogue's radar. You without telling anyone I wasn't exactly welcome to talk about it," I replied quietly. Brandon pushed back from the table, the legs of his chair scraping the hardwood. "No way! This has to be some coincidence. You don't just end up in Vogue. That's not how this works." Grace turned his way with a firmness I didn't know she had. "It's exactly how it works when the product is good and people can feel the authenticity behind it." The room fell silent again. She had said authenticity like it meant something big. Something I had earned with every sleepless night and every penny I'd scrimped. Dad tried again, slower this time, as if hoping he'd misheard. "So, you're telling us you built an actual company, a brand? Something legitimate?" I met his stare. "I built it from nothing, with my own hands." "Yes." Mom's voice trembled. "But how—" "You never said anything. You never asked," I said. Her eyes filled with something guilt, confusion, maybe both. "But we assumed you were struggling." "I was," I admitted, struggling to be taken seriously. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, pacing a little behind his chair. "This is unbelievable. You can't just—" Surprise us like this. You should have told us. When exactly, I asked. During which moment? When Dad told me I was wasting my life. When you said stocks were the only smart path. When Mom reminded me I'd had so much potential before I threw it away. When would have been a good time for you to hear me? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Grace leaned forward, her voice gentler now that the initial shock had settled. They selected your brand for next month's feature. She paused. Do you know how rare that is? I nodded once. I know. Did Vogue email you directly? She asked. Yes. When? This morning. The collective gasp that followed nearly made me flinch. Dad threw his napkin down. You got an email from Vogue and you didn't tell us. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. You think you would have believed me? He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Grace reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and scrolled quickly. She turned the screen toward the table so everyone could see the cover preview, a mock-up Vogue had shared with press teams. Front and center, a set of minimalist glass bottles with botanical illustrations. My bottles, my labels, my brand. Mom whispered, "Oh my God," and touched the photo like it might disappear. Grace murmured, "This is the biggest clean beauty feature of the season. They don't pick just anyone." Dad looked between the image and my face, trying to reconcile the two versions of me, the one he'd dismissed for years, and the one Vogue had decided was worth spotlighting. But why didn't you tell your family sooner? He finally asked. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Because I wanted you to be proud of me for who I am, not for the success I haven't even lived in yet. I wanted you to care before the world cared. Mom's eyes softened, but guilt clouded them. Dad's expression tightened as though the truth stung. Brandon's jaw worked, anger and confusion mixing. Grace watched all of us quiet but observant, like she knew the entire family dynamic had just shifted. Grandma broke the silence. Well, she said, tapping the table, seems like our girl's been building something real, while the rest of you were too busy doubting. Dad bristled. I wasn't doubting. Yes, you were. Grandma cut in sharply. All of you were, Brandon muttered. I just didn't think it was legit. It's real, Grace whispered. This is the kind of feature that launches brands nationally. I felt every eye on me. For the first time, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't soften myself to fit the mold they kept trying to force over me. Instead, I lifted my chin. Willow and Fern is mine, I said, and Vogue thinks it's good enough to feature. The table sat in a stunned quiet. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock ticked toward the next moment, one I'd been avoiding for years. The moment they realized I had built something without their permission, their approval or their validation. And they didn't know what to do with that. Not yet. But they were about to, because the truth had only just walked in the door. Dad broke the silence first, gripping the edge of the table so tightly the tendons stood out along his wrist. He did not dismiss the news, but rather tried to contain it. This is big, he declared, his voice tight with forced authority. Bigger than you're equipped to handle. A photo mock-up and an email mean pressure exposure and immediate scalability issues. Grace frowned. But Vogue doesn't send confirmation emails lightly. He ignored her, his gaze locked on me. Explain how this happened, step by step. What exactly did you do? The question wasn't curiosity. It was the frantic tone of someone trying to gain control of a runaway narrative. Dad, I said calmly, I built a product people liked. That's how it happened. That's not an explanation, he snapped. You don't get recognition like this unless you have a strategy, a plan for growth, something I can help manage. Unless what I asked dryly, unless I had a powerful last name, or unless I was someone you respected enough to believe in. He flinched, though he tried to hide it. Brandon jumped in before Dad could retaliate. Look, I'm not saying you didn't do something, but you're acting like this is normal. That small, getting this kind of attention, it's statistically improbable. And without strategy, it will crush you. Not impossible, Grace murmured. He shot her a look. You're missing the point. No, she said, steadying her voice. I think you're missing it. The room tensed around her words. Brandon wasn't used to being challenged. I cut him off. You want the truth? Fine. I folded my hands on the table, feeling my heartbeat settle into something cold and resolute. I worked nonstop for 3 years. I made products, I tested formulas, I learned packaging, branding, marketing, everything. I reinvested every single dollar. I slept 4 hours a night. I missed birthdays, holidays, and weekends. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have cheerleaders. I didn't have investors. And I kept going anyway. Brandon swallowed hard, thrown off by the intensity. I didn't land in Vogue by accident, I continued. I earned their attention. Mom wiped her eyes as if she didn't know how tears had reached them. Sweetheart, you went through all that alone. Yes, I said simply. Dad shook his head. You should have come to us. We could have. I raised an eyebrow. Could have what? Told me it wasn't a real career, encouraged me to quit, suggested a stable job for the 100th time. He tried to speak, but the truth pinned him down like a weight. Grandma let out a small grunt. She built something. That's more than most people in this room can say. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom stared at her plate like it might offer an escape. Brandon sank into his chair, cheeks red with either embarrassment or frustration, I couldn't tell which. Grace leaned her elbows on the table, her eyes warm but razor sharp. I told Brandon last week that Willow and Fern had the kind of authenticity big brands can't manufacture. I didn't know it was yours, but it makes sense now. She paused. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. That one sentence hit harder than anything my family had said in years. Dad straightened, shifting fully from doubt to control. All right. Say this is all true. Say Vogue really wants to feature your brand. This is where family support becomes crucial. You don't have the infrastructure for national demand. You need capital. You need scalability. And I know how to handle the business side of this. The shift was so abrupt it made me blink. Family support. Grandma scoffed. Since when? Dad raised his chin. Since now. This is bigger than her. If she succeeds, it reflects well on all of us. I can help you navigate the contracts, the manufacturing demands, the finance. Brandon nodded quickly. Yeah, we should strategize. This could be a family win. My stomach turned. Does the family win? I repeated, almost laughing. You mocked me 15 minutes ago. That was before we understood the scale, Dad said. But now that we do, we can reposition things. No, I replied firmly. The word cut through the room like a blade. Mom looked up, startled. Honey, your father is trying to help. Trying to take over. Grandma corrected. Dad's glare sharpened. This attitude won't get you far. You have to think about growth. You can't handle something like this yourself. I've handled everything myself, I said. That's why I'm here. Brandon leaned forward. You're being paranoid. We're offering support because we care. You're offering support because you see potential profit and control, I said quietly. You think I don't recognize that tone? I've heard it my whole life. He stiffened, caught. Grace touched his arm gently. Brandon, maybe don't say anything else right now. He pulled away, wounded pride flaring in his eyes. The air thickened again, static, tense, ready to snap. Dad stood abruptly. Enough. I'm calling a family meeting tomorrow. We're going to figure out how to manage this so it doesn't blow up in your face. I stood too. With all due respect, I'm not attending. You don't get to refuse, he barked. I just did. Mom clutched her napkin. Sweetheart, don't be like this. I spent years begging you to care. I said, my voice somehow steady despite the tremor under my ribs. You didn't. Now that Vogue cares, suddenly you want in. I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not your project. This is my business, my work, my identity, not a family asset. Dad took a step toward me, anger flickering behind his eyes. You will not speak to me that way. Grandma rose before he could get closer, her posture straight, her voice stern. She just did. He froze. Grace looked between all of us, shock and admiration mixing in her expression. Mom whispered, I don't understand how things got this far. They got this far, I said softly, because no one listened. A hollow quiet filled the room. The only sound was the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the faint chirping of crickets outside, nature unconcerned with the implosion occurring in that dining room. I picked up my phone from the table. The screen lit up with the unread Vogue email I'd been pretending not to feel burning in my pocket. "Where are you going?" Dad demanded. "Home," I said. "I have work to do." Brandon scoffed. "Work? After this bombshell?" "Yes," I said, "because while you're all trying to figure out how this affects you, I'm the one living it." And I walked out, feeling their shock trail behind me like smoke from a fire finally catching wind. I didn't look back when I stepped out of Grandma's house. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling the argument that exploded the second I crossed the threshold. Voices rising, then crashing over each other like a storm everyone knew was coming, but no one bothered to prepare for. The humid Tennessee air wrapped around me as I walked down the porch steps, steady but trembling on the inside. Dad had lost control of the narrative tonight, and he knew it. Brandon had lost his superiority. Mom had lost her illusion. And somehow I'd lost the fear that had kept me small for most of my life. My car waited at the end of the gravel drive. The moment I climbed in and shut the door, silence fell like a heavy blanket. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since dinner started. Everything, every word, every revelation, every stare pounded through my mind in waves. The headlights cut through the darkness as I pulled onto the main road. Fields blurred past shadows of barns and fences rising and falling along the horizon. It should have been peaceful. Instead, adrenaline thrummed beneath my skin, the kind that comes after standing up for yourself in a room full of people who always expected you to sit down. Driving helped. The rhythm of it, the distance, the familiarity. But halfway home, the shaking started subtle at first, then stronger until I had to pull over. I parked beside an old gas station that had been abandoned for years, its peeling signs still clinging to the rusted pole like a memory too stubborn to fade. My phone lit up with notifications. 6 missed calls from Dad, 4 from Brandon, 2 from Mom, 1 from Grandma. I ignored all of them. A lone text from Grace sat at the bottom of the screen. "Are you okay? I'm proud of you." My throat tightened. She barely knew me, yet she'd been the only one who'd listened with curiosity instead of judgment. I leaned back in my seat, staring at the dim reflection of my face in the windshield. The question echoed inside me, how had I kept all of this to myself for so long? The secrecy hadn't started as a strategy. It had started as survival. Years of being dismissed had trained me to build my dreams in silence, brick by quiet brick, until one day the house stood too tall to ignore. A pair of headlights appeared on the empty road sweeping past me before disappearing into the night. I imagined that version of myself from 3 years ago, the girl stirring formulas on a hot plate in her grandmother's kitchen praying she wasn't wasting her life. The girl is making deliveries out of her trunk. The girl worked the register at a local boutique during the day and created products until dawn. She'd been terrified. She'd also been determined. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her she wasn't crazy, that all the nights she cried into a pile of invoices were leading somewhere, that the world was about to notice the thing she'd bled herself dry to create. Another buzz from my phone. This time, it was Grandma. "Don't let them shake you. Call me when you're home." A lump formed in my throat. She had always been the thread holding me together when the seams threatened to unravel. I put the car in drive and continued down the road, passing the small towns and quiet farmland I knew better than my own reflection. The moon followed me the whole way, low and golden, like it was watching over the version of me I was becoming. By the time I reached my driveway, the shaking had mostly stopped. My tiny workshop sat beside the house porch light, glowing softly. Shelves visible through the window were lined with dried lavender calendula, rosemary glass jars, tiny bottles, all the ingredients of a life built from scratch. I walked inside and flipped on the lights. The familiar scent of essential oils wrapped around me instantly, cedarwood, bergamot, wild mint, a reminder of every hour I'd spent pouring myself into something no one believed in. The wooden table was still cluttered with labels, mixing bowls, droppers, and notebooks filled with formula tweaks. It looked messy to anyone else. To me, it looked like a map of every step I'd taken. My laptop sat open with the Vogue email still flashing at the top. Final confirmation needed. I hovered my finger over the trackpad. Every voice from dinner whispered in my head, doubt, disbelief, warnings, mockery. But beneath all of that, something steadier pulsed. My own voice. I clicked the email open again, rereading their words. We believe your story represents the spirit of this feature. Authentic, rooted, transformative. We would love to include Willow and Fern in our upcoming issue. I sat down at my work table, exhaling a breath that felt like a release, a surrender, and a declaration all at once. The glow of the screen lit my hands as I typed a short reply. I'm available. Let's schedule the shoot. Before I could overthink it, I hit send. A soft ping echoed through the workshop. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something warm, steady, powerful enough to hold me upright. Footsteps crunched outside. For a moment, dread prickled up my spine, Dad Brandon. But the knock was soft, familiar. Grandma stepped inside, wearing her cardigan and house shoes, face lined with concern and pride. I figured you'd be here, she said, closing the door behind her. I couldn't go home yet, I admitted. She nodded. I heard enough to know it wasn't easy. It never is with them. She studied my face, then walked over and wrapped her arms around me. Let me tell you something, honey, she whispered. They call you a broke seller because it's the only version of you they understand. They don't know how to love something they can't control. The truth of it landed deep. But you, she said, touching the side of my face, are finally learning how to love yourself without needing their approval. That's the real miracle here, not Vogue, not a feature. You. My eyes burned as I leaned into her shoulder. Outside, the night hummed. Inside, something in me settled like a foundation finally hardened after years of curing. Grandma pulled back, brushing hair from my cheek. Come on, she said. Tell me everything they refuse to hear. And in my tiny workshop, surrounded by glass bottles and unfinished dreams, I finally let the whole story spill out. Sunlight slipped through the blinds long before I was ready to open my eyes. I'd fallen asleep at my work table, head resting on my folded arms, the faint scent of rosemary and lavender still clinging to my skin. My laptop hummed beside me, the last email I sent, the email still glowing on the screen. Vogue had my confirmation. No turning back now. A tight ache settled in my shoulders as I straightened up. The workshop felt different in the morning light, almost like it was meeting a new version of me. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe something inside me had shifted just enough to change the way the room breathed. My phone buzzed across the table. 5 more texts from Dad, 3 from Mom, 1 from Brandon, short and sharp. We need to talk. Seriously. I let the screen go dark. Another buzz, this one from Grace. I'm still thinking about last night. Call me when you're awake. She didn't owe me any concern yet. She offered it anyway. The simplicity of that tugged at something soft in my chest. Footsteps shuffled on the porch outside. A moment later, Grandma's knock echoed through the workshop. You up, sweetheart? I opened the door to her smiling face and her familiar flannel robe. Made you coffee, she said, lifting a travel mug like it was a peace offering. My throat warmed. Thanks, Grandma. She stepped inside with a quick scan of the room, her eyes lingering on the scattered notebooks, drying herbs and stacks of labeled jars. This place, she whispered, is proof you never needed their permission. We sat on the old wooden bench under the window. Birds chirped like they had no idea my entire world had cracked open less than 12 hours ago. Grandma sipped her coffee first, then said, I imagine your phone's been lighting up like a slot machine. You have no idea. Oh, I got a taste of it. She held up her own phone. Your father called me 4 times after you left, trying to convince me to talk sense into you. A small laugh escaped me. I'm sure you did exactly that. I did talk sense, she said firmly, just not the version he wanted. I leaned my shoulder into hers, drawn to the comfort she radiated so effortlessly. I'm scared, I admitted quietly. Of what? What comes next? She nodded slowly. You've worked with your head down for years. Now the world's asking you to lift it up. Her hand covered mine. It's okay to feel shaky before you walk into the light. My eyes stung, but I blinked back the tears. Grandma's expression softened. Do you want to show me the email I handed her my laptop? She read every line with the seriousness of someone studying a legal contract. When she reached the end, she whispered, My God, sweetheart, this isn't small. This is a door swinging wide open. I nodded. Grace said the same thing. And she's right. Grandma closed the laptop gently, then turned toward me. Don't let anyone, family included, make you shrink to fit the version of you they're comfortable with. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Dad. Long, unexpectedly long. I didn't play it. The thought of hearing his voice full of disappointment or forced concern or frustrated arrogance made my stomach twist. I don't know how to face them, I admitted. Not today. You don't have to, Grandma said simply. I don't know. People who ignore your voice don't get immediate access when they finally want something from you. The truth of that sank in slow and steady. Another vibration jolted the table. A message from an unknown New York number. Congratulations. We're coordinating travel for the Vogue shoot. Are you available for a brief call this afternoon? My breath hitched. This was real. This was happening. No amount of disbelief from my family could overshadow it now. Before I could answer, Grandma said, "You're about to have a day full of decisions. Start with the important one, which is breakfast," she said with a wink. "You think on an empty stomach, and you'll end up in tears by noon." She wasn't wrong. I followed her back into the house, still in yesterday's clothes, hair-tangled heart, thudding like the beat of some anthem I hadn't learned the words to yet. The kitchen smelled like toast and her homemade apple butter. While she cracked eggs into a skillet, I sat at the counter scrolling through emails, orders, inquiries, congratulations from customers who'd somehow heard whispers of the feature. Grandma slid a plate in front of me. "Eat," I laughed. "Yes, ma'am." Halfway through breakfast, she leaned her elbows on the counter. "Tell me something." "What?" "What did it feel like," she asked, "when Grace recognized your brand before your father did?" I stared into my plate, replaying that exact moment, the shock, the way her eyes widened, the respect in her voice. "It felt like being seen," I whispered, "for the first time in years." Grandma nodded knowingly. Sometimes strangers see your light long before family ever will. The truth of that lodged in my chest. A car door slammed outside. Loud. Too loud. Grandma and I exchanged a look. I stood slowly, heart tight, and peered through the window. Brandon stood in the driveway, hands jammed in his pockets, jaw clenched. His eyes moved from my workshop to the house with a determination I'd seen before, the kind that preceded him, arguing for something he believed he deserved. Grandma's voice hardened. "If you don't want company, you say so." I nodded. "I don't." She marched to the door before I could stop her. He barely lifted his hand to knock before she opened it. "You're early," she said curtly. "I need to talk to her," Brandon said. "No," Grandma replied. "She's busy." I stepped beside her. "I'm fine, Grandma." Brandon pulled in a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "Look, I'm not here to fight." "Then what do you want?" I asked. His eyes darted toward the workshop, then back to me. "To figure things out before this gets out of hand." "It's already out of hand," I said. "And that's not my fault." He exhaled shakily. "I still think you should have told us. You weren't listening," I repeated. He rubbed his forehead. "Dad's losing it inside the house. Mom's upset. And I don't know how to react to any of this." "Okay. Try with humility," Grandma offered dryly. I bit back a smile. Brandon stared at me, almost pleading. "Can we talk later? Just us. Please." A long moment stretched between us. Maybe I said finally, "But not now." He nodded, defeated, stepped back, and walked to his car without another word. Grandma closed the door gently. "Good," she said. "Let him wait." I exhaled, feeling lighter than I had any right to. The morning sun warmed the windows. The future was knocking louder than Brandon ever could. When my phone buzzed again with the initials of the Vogue coordinator, I didn't hesitate. I answered. "Hi," I said, my voice steady. "This is the founder of Willow and Fern." "I'm ready." The voice on the other end of the line sounded crisp, warm, and unmistakably New York. "Hi, this is Lila from Vogue. Thank you for confirming. We're excited to move forward with your feature." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. My workshop suddenly felt smaller than a closet, the walls closing in with the weight of what she'd just said. "Thank you," I managed. "I'm excited too." "We'll need a quick introductory call today," she continued, "just to align on concept, timeline, and travel. Do you have 15 minutes? I almost said yes, but Grandma stepped behind me and squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "Breathe." "I do," I said into the phone. "I'm available now." Perfect, Lila replied. Let me loop in our creative producer. A click echoed through my earpiece, then a second voice chimed in, smooth, confident, amused. Is this the mystery founder everyone's been buzzing about? I blinked. I guess that's me. Well, you've caused quite the stir over here, he said. We've had your product tested internally for weeks. People love your formulations. Goosebumps rose across my arms. My family had called it a hobby. Vogue called it a formulation. We're planning a natural light shoot, he continued, in a space that reflects your brand's roots, ideally somewhere authentic close to where you source ingredients. My workshop, I said, and my grandmother's land, that he said sounds perfect. Grandma smiled, pride softening her features. She mouthed, "Told you," Lila added. If you're comfortable, we'd like to get some shots of you mid-process mixing, blending, sketching your botanical designs. My throat tightened around a sudden wave of emotion. Yes, I whispered. I can do that. When the call ended, I dropped the phone onto the table and exhaled. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was power, momentum, the sense that my life had just stepped onto a moving walkway I'd fought tooth and nail to reach. Grandma lowered herself onto the stool beside me. There it is, she said softly. That sound in your voice. I haven't heard it since you were a kid. What sound? Belief, she whispered. Tears threatened to rise, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. A name flashed across the screen. Grace. Answer, Grandma said. She's on your side. I picked it up. Hey, her voice crackled with urgency. Are you okay? I've been thinking about you all morning. Last night was a lot. It was, I admitted. Brandon is freaking out, she said. Your parents are worse. They're spinning this whole story about being blindsided. A bitter laugh escaped me. That tracks. But listen, she continued. None of that matters right now. What matters is the Vogue call. Did it go well? It went better than I dreamed. She squealed so loudly I had to pull the phone away. I knew it. I told Brandon something big was coming. I swear the way your dad looked like the floor had opened underneath him. Grace, I interrupted, laughing, please don't make me relive it. Sorry, she said. I'm just excited for you. Really excited. Her excitement felt genuine, warm in a way I wasn't used to. I leaned back against the table, letting myself breathe in sincerity. You deserve this, she added quietly. You've worked for it. My chest tightened. Words like that were different when they came from someone who had no obligation to say them. Thank you, I whispered. Truly. Hey, she said, shifting gears. I'll let you get back to planning. Just know I'm here if you need anything. The call ended with a lightness I didn't expect, like someone had handed me a small burst of oxygen. Grandma stood wiping her hands on her robe. You're not doing any of this alone, she said. For a moment, the world stilled in a way that felt safe. Then tires crackled on the gravel outside. I stiffened. Grandma walked to the window and peeked through the curtain. It's your mother. My stomach dropped. Already. She's walking up, Grandma murmured, and she looks shaken. I didn't have the emotional bandwidth for another confrontation. Do you want me to get the door? Grandma asked. No, I said, lifting my chin. I'll do it. The knock was soft, hesitant. I opened the door to find Mom standing there in a pale blue sweater, eyes rimmed with red, like she'd cried more than once this morning. She held her purse strap with both hands, knuckles pale. Honey, she whispered. Didn't know if you'd want to see me. I didn't, I admitted. But you're here, so say what you need to say. Her breath hitched. She stepped forward but stopped halfway as if waiting for permission. I owe you an apology, she said, voice trembling. For last night, for a lot of nights. A long silence followed. She swallowed hard. Your father and I, well, we were wrong. And I know you don't have any reason to believe we can change, but I want to try. The apology wasn't perfect, but it was something. Behind me, Grandma stayed quiet, giving us space without leaving us alone. Mom's gaze flicked toward the workshop. Is this where you make everything? Yes. May I see? I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, eyes scanning the shelves, the jars, the herbs, the labels. Her fingers hovered over the work table as if it were a sacred thing she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch. "I had no idea," she whispered. "None." "That was the problem," I replied. Tears filled her eyes again, but she didn't defend herself. She simply nodded. "I want to do better," she said quietly, "if you'll let me." A piece of me softened, but only slightly. "I don't know what this will look like," I said, honest to the bone, "but we can start with time, space, and honesty." She nodded again. "I can do that." As she turned to leave, Grandma winked at me behind her back. My phone buzzed once more. Another email from Vogue sending travel details shortly. "Prepare for a very big week." I exhaled a shaky breath. The pace of my life had officially changed, and there was no turning back. I woke before sunrise not because of nerves, but because the house felt too still. Grandma was already up, the soft clatter of pans drifting from the kitchen. She cooked when she was excited, anxious, or bored today. I suspected it was all three. When I stepped into the workshop, the air felt charged, like waiting for a storm to break. My phone buzzed, nonstop emails from the Vogue team, confirmations from the creative producer, a timeline for the shoot, even a list of suggested outfits. I scanned everything twice then, once more, not because I needed to, but because I couldn't believe these instructions were meant for me. At 7:15 sharp, the first car rolled into the driveway. A black SUV, sleek, polished foreign to this quiet piece of Tennessee. Grandma peeked through the window. "Well, sweetheart," she said, "looks like the big city finally knocked on your little door." I swallowed. "Feels unreal." "Feels earned," she corrected. The SUV door opened, and the creative producer stepped out. A tall woman named Marie, with a camera slung over her shoulder and a clipboard tucked beneath her arm. Her dark hair was twisted into a bun, her expression alert and calculating, the way someone scans a room before deciding where the best light will fall. "You must be Hazel," she said, offering her hand with a warm, firm grip. "We've been dying to meet you." "We," I echoed. She grinned. "Oh, honey, they're right behind me." Two more cars pulled in equipment cases, garment bags, lighting rigs, makeup kits. For a moment, I stood frozen. My workshop looked so small next to their vanishing piles of gear. Marie followed my gaze. "Relax," she said gently. "This is what it looks like when the world wants to hear your story." My stomach fluttered. Grandma stepped outside, then hands on her hips like a Southern general surveying an approaching army. "Morning," she called. "Whoever needs coffee, I put on 2 pots." A ripple of grateful laughter moved through the crew. Marie leaned toward me. "She's fantastic." "She is," I agreed. The team moved with choreographed precision, one group testing light by the window, another rearranging my shelves for visual symmetry. A photographer named Riley circled the space with an intense focus, snapping test shots of everything: bottles, herbs, labels, even the worn wooden table where I'd spent hundreds of late nights. "This place," Riley murmured, "is gold." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "It's small. It's perfect," she said. "Honest, real, not manufactured like the brands we usually shoot. Honest, real." 2 words my family had never used about me. While the team set up, Grace arrived wearing jeans, a white blouse, and a nervous smile, stopping short when she saw the driveway full of people. "Oh my gosh," she whispered, "this is actually happening." Her excitement eased something inside me. She hugged me soft, quick, warm, like she genuinely cared about how today would go. "Brandon doesn't know I'm here," she said quietly. I figured it was better that way. "He's processing." Processing meant sulking. Processing meant rewriting history to feel less threatened. Processing meant blaming me for a success I'd built without him. "It's fine," I said. "I'm glad you came." She smiled, relieved. The shoot began in waves. First portraits, then environmental shots, then lifestyle frames, me mixing oils, sketching label designs, pouring a product into a glass jar. The photographer asked questions as she worked her voice soft enough not to break the moment. "How did you learn? How long did you build in silence? What did it feel like to work without support?" Each question dug deeper than I expected. My answers surfaced parts of myself I'd buried beneath long nights and quiet determination. Several times I caught Grace watching from the corner, awe softening her expression. More than once she wiped away a tear. Marie paused between shots. "Do you realize how rare this is?" she asked. "A brand built from the ground up by someone who never had a safety net?" I shrugged gently. I didn't think about it like that. I just knew I couldn't fail. "But you didn't," she said. "You transcended." The word hit me hard, transcended. A label no one in my family had ever imagined fitting me. Around noon, we shot outside. The sunlight filtered through the trees, catching the lavender rose Grandma planted with me my first year back home. The breeze carried hints of mint and pine. It felt surreal, the land that raised me, finally witnessing my rise. "Stand right there," Riley said. "Look up slightly." "Yes, like that." The shutter fluttered softly as the photographer adjusted her angle, capturing every quiet shift in my expression. Each shutter sound echoed louder than the last. As we filmed, a familiar car slowed on the road, Dad's silver sedan. His shape was unmistakable even through the windshield. My pulse spiked. He didn't stop, but he slowed to a crawl, leaning forward against the steering wheel. He lingered long enough to see the team. The equipment and the photographer crouched in the grass, capturing my image as though it mattered. His face was visible through the windshield for a long second, etched with a mixture of disbelief, shame, and a flicker of naked, stunned regret. He looked intensely uncomfortable. He drove off without stopping. My chest tightened. Grandma noticed. She placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Let him watch from the distance he created." I nodded, swallowing the ache. By early afternoon, the interview portion began. Lila joined via video call, face framed by sleek office windows that hinted at Manhattan's skyline. "We want to capture your voice exactly how it is," she said. "The truth behind the brand." "My truth hasn't always been welcome," I murmured. "That's why it's valuable," she replied. "Speak it." So I did. I talked about the loneliness of starting small, doing markets where no one stopped at my booth, watching other brands get investment while I built everything penny by penny, feeling invisible in rooms where my family never saw me, creating something because I had no choice but to create. The crew went silent. Even Riley lowered her camera. When I finished, Lila's voice was soft. "People need to hear that." The shoot wrapped just after 3. As the team packed up, Riley approached with her camera swinging at her side. "Your story is going to hit harder than you think," she said. "This what you've built is going to change your life." "I hope so," I admitted. "No," she corrected, smiling. "It already has." As the last car pulled away and the workshop settled back into its familiar quiet, Grace hugged me tight. "You were incredible," she whispered. "They saw you today, really saw you." I leaned into her warmth. "I'm not used to that." "Well," she said, pulling back with a smile, "get used to it." Grandma joined us, her eyes shining. "Your father drove by," she said. "Did you see him?" I did. "Looks like he finally understands the truth." I nodded. But when I stepped inside the workshop, jars glinting in the afternoon light, the lingering scent of lavender drifting through the air, I realized something important I didn't need him to understand. Not anymore. Tomorrow, the world will see what I built. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone shrink it down to fit their comfort. I woke up thinking the crew was still there, the same way you still hear ocean waves after leaving the beach. But it was only the ghost of yesterday. Soft footsteps, low voices, the hum of lighting rigs, the faint rhythm of a camera shutter that had followed me like a heartbeat. When I pushed open the workshop door, everything was exactly where it belonged again. No lights, no cables, no whirlwind of stylists or producers, just me, my shelves, my jars, and the quiet that had carried me through years of doubt. I wasn't alone for long. Grandma appeared on the porch holding 2 mugs of coffee. Her voice was gentle. "You look like someone who slept with one eye open." I kept replaying everything I said, the shoot, the interview, the way they talked about my work. "And you still don't believe you earned it," she teased. "I'm trying." She handed me the mug. "Try harder." I smiled despite myself. Before I could respond, tires crunched down the gravel driveway. The sound was too heavy to be a mail delivery, too slow to be a neighbor. My chest tightened when I saw Dad's silver sedan rolling to a stop. Grandma muttered, "Well, speak of the devil, and watch him tidy his hair." Dad stepped out wearing a navy blazer even though it was barely 8 in the morning. His expression carried that old mixture authority, worry, irritation, like he hadn't decided which version he needed yet. "Hazel," he said, smoothing his jacket. "We need to talk." Grandma stepped forward. "Say whatever you need to from right there, William." He ignored her. "Hazel, can we speak privately?" I didn't move. "We can talk here." His jaw tightened. "Fine." He glanced toward the workshop door. "I drove by yesterday. The scene outside was surprising. Surprising meant intimidating." "You didn't stop," I said. "Because I didn't want to interrupt." His gaze flicked over the porch, the yard, then back to me. "I spent the night thinking. About everything. About you." Grandma crossed her arms. "That would be a first." He shot her a glare, but she didn't flinch. "I was wrong," he said, turning back to me. "I underestimated you. I misjudged the path you chose. I let my expectations get in the way of seeing who you've become." The words were correct, technically correct, but something about them felt rehearsed. I kept my voice calm. "And what changed for you?" Dad didn't hesitate. "The scale of what you're involved in. Vogue isn't just another magazine. It's an influence. And with influence comes pressure, business decisions, exposure. You have raw talent, clearly. But this level of attention can crush small brands. You will need guidance now more than ever." There it was, the real center of gravity. No apology. Control. "I'm not asking for guidance," I said. "You should," he countered. The shoot looked expensive, high production value. They'll expect professionalism, scalability, and infrastructure. I can help protect you from making rookie mistakes. I have the contacts. I didn't have any of this built 3 years ago either." He exhaled sharply. "Hazel, you have raw talent, clearly. But this level of attention can crush small brands. You need someone who understands business strategy." "Meaning you," I said. He didn't deny it. "I can help protect you." Grandma snorted. "Protect her from what?" Herself. Dad ignored her again. "Hazel, I have contacts, resources, and if this feature really happens, people will come after a piece of what you built. Investors, buyers, competitors. You can't navigate that alone." "I'm not alone," I said softly. He blinked, surprised, as if the concept had never occurred to him. The workshop door creaked behind us. Grace stepped out, tying her hair into a loose ponytail. She froze when she saw Dad. "Oh, I didn't know you were here." His shoulders lifted tight and rigid. "Grace." She offered a polite nod, but moved to my side, her presence quiet yet steady. "I came to help Hazel inventory before the orders spike." Dad looked at her as if she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Since when do you two—" "Since she supported me," I said, without hesitation, without needing proof. He swallowed, throat working. "Hazel, I'm trying." "I know," I said, "but trying isn't the same as listening." Grace's eyes flicked to mine, warm with unspoken encouragement. Dad's voice dropped. "I don't want to be left out of your success." That landed heavier than he meant it to. I spent years building something alone because being left out of your approval was easier than being judged for every step I said. Dad's posture deflated, not entirely, but enough to show he'd absorbed the blow. Grandma stepped closer to me. "She's not shutting the door, William. She's locking it until you learn to knock." Dad rubbed his temples. "I want to fix this. I truly do, but I don't know how." "Start with honesty," I said, "and patience. It won't be fast." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." I wasn't sure yet if that was true, but it was the closest thing to sincerity I'd seen in him in years. He took a step back. "I'll wait for you to reach out, when you're ready." It was the first time he'd ever left a conversation without controlling the ending. After his car disappeared down the road, the air felt lighter. Grace let out a long breath. I didn't expect him to say any of that. Neither did I. She nudged my elbow. "But you were steady. Powerful. You didn't shrink." "I'm done shrinking," I said. "I don't have room for that anymore." Grandma smiled proud. "Good, because you've got a big week ahead." She wasn't wrong. My inbox was already filled with questions from the Vogue team, shoot selects, fact checks, brand details, scheduling. "Are you ready for all this?" Grace asked. "No," I admitted. "But I'm doing it anyway," she smiled. "Then you're more ready than you think." We spent the next hour organizing shelves, labeling batches, and stacking new product trays. The simple rhythm grounded me the same way music does when someone's trying to remember who they are. As we worked, Grace said, "I've never seen someone rebuild themselves the way you have." "You helped," I whispered. "Not really." "You did," I insisted. She paused, touched, but didn't push further. When she left that afternoon, the workshop was glowing in the warm light pouring through the windows. I sat at my table, surrounded by everything I'd created with my own 2 hands, and allowed myself one quiet thought. If this is what the day after looks like, maybe I'm ready for the rest. And for the first time, I didn't just hope the world would see me. I knew it would. The email arrived just after 10 in the morning, short, polished, matter of fact. "Your feature is confirmed for the September issue. We will send proofs for approval within 72 hours. I reread it 3 times before the reality settled into my chest like a warm, steady weight. September, the biggest issue of the year, the issue people kept on coffee tables and magazine racks and memory boxes, and my brand, my tiny handmade late-night lavender-stained brand, would be inside it. I let the workshop fall quiet around me, the kind of silence that feels like standing on a cliff right before sunrise. Then my phone buzzed. "Grace." They know her text said, "Your parents. Brandon. Everybody." I didn't have time to respond before the next message came. "Brace yourself." 5 minutes later, the family group chat, which I normally muted, exploded. From Mom, "Hazel, call us immediately. We need to discuss something important." From Dad, "We shouldn't hear updates about your life from outsiders. We need to talk. Today." From Brandon, "Why didn't you tell us?" "Seriously, you made us look stupid." I stared at the screen as anger, disbelief, and that old familiar ache tightened around my ribs. Not one congratulations, not a single "I'm proud of you." Only panic, only entitlement. Grandma appeared in the doorway holding a basket of freshly cut rosemary. "Judging by your face," she said, "I'm guessing the news reached the wrong ears." "They're upset they didn't hear it from me," I muttered. "Upset they weren't involved. Upset they look clueless." She set the basket on my table. Funny how people confuse embarrassment with concern. The workshop phone rang before I could respond. The shrill landline one only customers and suppliers ever used made me jump. I picked it up cautiously. "Willow and Fern, this is Hazel." A man cleared his throat. "Hello, Miss Bowman. This is Gerald Porter from Porter and Lang Consulting. Your father suggested we reach out to discuss preparing your company for scale after your upcoming media exposure." My stomach dropped. Dad had already started making moves, pulling strings, positioning himself, inserting his circle. "I'm not interested," I said. "But thank you." He chuckled lightly as if I were a child refusing broccoli. "I believe you may not fully grasp the magnitude of what Vogue coverage can do. Your father insists it's my company," I said sharply. "Not his." A pause. Long, surprised. Then understood. "If you change your mind, I won't." I hung up before he finished. Grandma smirked. That felt good, didn't it? But the peace didn't last. Minutes later, a car door slammed outside. I didn't have to look to know whose it was. Brandon. He strode across the gravel like a man marching into a courtroom. Anger radiated off him in waves. He didn't even knock, just opened the workshop door and stopped short when he saw Grandma standing inside like a guard dog. "Hazel," he said, chest rising and falling. "We need to talk. Now." She raised an eyebrow. "You have a problem with knocking." He clenched his jaw but didn't answer. I crossed my arms. "Say what you came to say." "You blindsided us," he snapped. "All of us. You knew Vogue was coming. You knew the shoot was happening. You knew how big this was. And you didn't think to let your own family know." "Why should I?" I asked, voice steady. "You all made it clear years ago you didn't take my work seriously. That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." He paced, unable to hold still. "Dad is furious. Mom's in tears. And I don't even know how to explain this to people. They're asking me why I didn't know." Why didn't you tell me?" "That's your concern," I asked quietly. "What will you look like?" His silence was admission. I took a breath. "You want the truth? You never asked. Not once. You assumed everything I did was small, silly, temporary, and when people assume you're insignificant long enough, you stop offering them opportunities to prove it again." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Grandma muttered, "She's right," under her breath. Brandon rubbed his face with both hands. "Look, I'm not saying we handled things well. I know we didn't. But this is huge, Hazel. No one gets into Vogue without backing, without a campaign, without industry push, and somehow you did. And we weren't there." His voice cracked not with sadness, but with bruised pride. I softened barely. "I didn't do this to hurt you. I know," he said. But it did. The admission surprised me. Before I could respond, Mom's SUV turned onto the driveway. She parked crookedly, barely turning off the engine before running toward the workshop with frantic urgency. She didn't knock either. She rushed inside, breathless. "Hazel." Her hand flew to her chest. "I just spoke to your father. He said that I made a fool of him," I asked. Her eyes flickered. She didn't deny it. Then she stepped closer and did something I didn't expect. She took my hands. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "we are proud. We truly are. But we're overwhelmed. We don't know how to fit into your world right now." Her honesty disarmed me more than her tears would have. "That's not your world to fit into," I said softly. "It's mine. You don't have to approve of it to respect it." Mom nodded slowly, absorbing the words like they stung. "I want to understand," she said. "I don't know how yet, but I want to." Brandon leaned against the work table, looking lost. "I don't want us to be the last to know things," he murmured. "You were the last to believe me," I replied. Silence filled the room. The silence didn't carry anger or weight, just the truth sitting openly between us. Just truthful. After a long moment, Dad pulled into the driveway too. He stepped out more cautiously than the others, as if already aware the ground beneath him was unstable. He approached the door but didn't cross the threshold. "May I come in?" he asked. Grandma raised her eyebrows. "Well, look at that. A breakthrough." I nodded. "Come in, Dad." He moved slowly, eyes scanning the shelves, the jars, the workstation, as if seeing it all for the first time. Finally, he spoke. "Hazel, I misjudged the importance of what you were doing, and I apologize, truly." His apology wasn't flawless or complete, but it was real, and it was the first unprompted apology he'd ever given me. "I know," I said quietly, "but we're not fixing decades in one afternoon." "I understand," he replied, and for once I believed him. Mom wiped a tear. Brandon looked away. Grandma nodded approvingly. The tension broke like a wave receding from the shore. We weren't healed, not even close. But the wall between us finally had cracks in it, and I had no intention of patching them closed. The proof arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon, slipped into my inbox with a simple subject line, Vogue, September feature layout for review. No fanfare, no fireworks, just a calm message holding the biggest moment of my career. I opened the file with hands that didn't quite feel like mine. The first page loaded slowly, the screen brightening one soft brushstroke at a time until my face appeared standing in the doorway of my workshop, sunlight catching the edges of my hair jars and herbs blurred behind me like a painted backdrop. For a moment, I forgot how to speak. I had expected something small, a corner photo, maybe a half-page mention. Instead, they'd given me a 2-page spread with the headline, Willow and Fern, the Southern Maker Redefining Clean Beauty. My throat tightened. I stared at the words so long the room seemed to tilt. Grandma stood behind me, leaning close, her breath a warm whisper on my shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "Look at you." Her hands trembled as she touched the screen. I wasn't sure how long I sat there before the next pages scrolled. Close-ups of my hands mixing oils, my sketches laid out on the wooden table, rows of rosemary, lavender, and echinacea swaying in the sunlight. And then my story. My real story. Not the sugar-coated version, not the family-approved version. The truth. The article began with a line that knocked the air out of my lungs. Hazel Bowman built her company the way she lived her life, quietly, stubbornly, and without the applause she deserved. Grandma sniffed loudly. Well, they certainly did their homework. Before I could wipe my eyes, a car door slammed outside. My stomach dropped. "Please don't let it be." "It is," Grandma said, peeking through the blinds. "Your brother." Brandon marched toward the porch phone in hand, panic in his posture. I stepped outside before he could pound on the door. His voice came out in a rush. "Why didn't you tell me the proof was coming out today? Dad just saw them. He sent the whole family a screenshot. They're blowing up my phone asking what I knew and when I knew it." "Slow down. I can't slow down." He raked a hand through his hair. "You're all over the September issue. Do you have any idea how big that is? People at work are sending it around already. My boss called me into his office like I've been hiding a celebrity sister." I blinked. "You're upset because people are congratulating you." "I'm upset," he snapped, "because I'm the one who looks clueless. Everyone thought I'd be the first to know." "You weren't," I said gently, "because you didn't ask." He flinched. Grandma opened the door enough to stick her head out. "Brandon, sweetheart, you're welcome to come inside if you're planning on being supportive. If you're here to unload judgment, you can do that in your own driveway." He deflated a little. "I'm not judging her, I swear. I don't know how to fit into this." "That's the second time someone in this family has said that this week," I murmured. He swallowed. "I mean it. I want to understand, but I'm still catching up." "Then start by being proud," I said, "not panic." His shoulders softened. "I am proud. I just wish we hadn't been so late to see it." That admission, simple as it was, landed deeper than any apology. "Do you want to see the proof?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Inside the workshop, he leaned over my laptop, his breath hitching when the spread loaded. "Hazel, this is real, like really real. I know." He read in silence, jaw-tight eyes narrowing occasionally when the article mentioned my early struggles details he'd never cared to ask about. When he reached the part describing my lack of family support, he winced. "They didn't lie," I said. "I know," he whispered. Before he could say more, Mom's ringtone chimed. Then Dad's, then Mom again. Brandon groaned. "They're losing it. Let them," Grandma said, taking her seat like a queen reclaiming her throne. "They can sit with their feelings for a while." I laughed under my breath, tension easing for the first time that day. An hour later, Mom showed up, hairbrushed, makeup perfect, like she was arriving for an interview of her own. Behind her, Dad stepped out of the car in a crisp shirt, shoulders stiff. They walked in without arguing for once. Mom approached first. "Hazel, you're in Vogue." "Yes, it's breathtaking." Her voice broke. She pressed a hand to her lips, eyes shining. "I had no idea they would portray you with this much reverence." "Why wouldn't they?" Grandma said dryly. Dad cleared his throat. "We read the article." And I asked. "It was honest," he said, though the words seemed to sting. "Painfully so. There is no denying the depth of your sacrifice now. I saw the truth of your struggle in every word." "It had to be," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I won't pretend it was pleasant to read, but it was necessary and accurate." Mom squeezed my hand. "We're proud of you, more than you know." I searched her face. This time, the pride looked real, not performative, not panicked, not about how it reflected on her. Real. The four of them crowded around my laptop, my grandmother, my parents, my brother, each absorbing the proof of a journey I'd taken alone. A strange peace settled over me. We weren't fixed. We weren't healed. We weren't suddenly a family that communicated flawlessly. But for the first time, they weren't looking at me with doubt. They were looking at me with recognition. They weren't looking at me with pity or confusion or that familiar disbelief anymore, only recognition steady and overdue, an understanding they'd never allowed themselves before. When they left the workshop, felt different, lighter, like some invisible burden had been set down between the shelves. My phone chimed. "Grace, well, did they see it?" I texted back. "Yes, it finally hit them." Her reply came instantly. "Good. They needed a reminder of who you are." I smiled, closing the laptop gently. The world was about to meet Willow and Fern, and my family finally was meeting me. Orders began pouring in the morning after the proofs went out so fast my notifications froze twice. At first I thought it was a glitch, some kind of bot spike or accidental promotion. But then the messages rolled in through my website, contact form, Instagram DMs, even emails from boutique owners who wanted to place wholesale orders before the issue launched. Grandma walked into the workshop with a plate of biscuits and stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the spinning numbers on my dashboard. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "Is that real?" "Every bit of it," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. She set the plate down, wiped her hands on her apron, and stared at the screen like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Well, sweetheart, I hope you stretched before this run because you're about to sprint." She wasn't wrong. I spent the next 3 hours sorting orders by hand, reorganizing shelves, labeling dozens of new batches, answering customer questions, and trying not to panic about inventory. By noon, Grace burst through the door holding 2 coffees and an expression full of adrenaline. "We're trending," she said breathlessly. "Hazel, your brand is trending. People are stitching the Vogue spread and talking about you on TikTok." "Me?" I asked, stunned. "Or the products both?" She shoved her phone into my hands. A video played someone unwrapping one of my serums like it was a luxury perfume. The caption read, "How did this woman end up in Vogue before half the celebrities obsessed?" My throat tightened. "They're talking like I belong there." "You do," she said simply. Before I could process it, her phone started ringing. She glanced at the screen. "It's my mom, probably wanting to know if the rumors are true." Rumors. About me, in Vogue, in Tennessee. That alone said everything about how far I'd come. By mid-afternoon, the driveway filled with cars, not reporters, not photographers, but neighbors. People from town, women who had bought from me at the farmer's market long before Willow and Fern had a website. One of them, Mrs. Hanley, waved a newspaper as she approached the porch. "I heard you were in some fancy magazine," she said. "I want to buy 10 gift sets before they sell out." Grandma beamed. "You heard correctly." I scrambled to assemble sets silently, thanking the version of myself who ordered extra boxes last month on a whim. People filtered in and out for over an hour, each carrying something I had made with my own hands. When the last neighbor left, the workshop looked like a storm had passed through ribbons on the floor, jars lined up like soldiers awaiting orders, shipping boxes stacked to the ceiling. Grace exhaled. "This is a lot. This is unbelievable." "This is the beginning," she said. "You need help." She wasn't wrong, but hiring employees felt like stepping onto another cliff. "I don't know who I'd even hire." Her expression softened. "I do." Before she explained, a familiar car turned into the driveway again. This time it wasn't Dad or Mom or Brandon. It was Mr. Turner, the owner of the only gift shop in town, who'd once told me kindly but firmly that handmade brands never last past Christmas. He stepped out awkwardly, hat in hand. "Afternoon, Hazel," he said. "I hear you're blowing up bigger than my store's payroll." I suppressed a smile. "Something like that." He shuffled his feet. "I'd like to revisit the idea of carrying your products, if you're open to it." Grandma raised an eyebrow so high it nearly touched her hairline. "Well, isn't this a turn?" I kept my tone polite. "I appreciate that, Mr. Turner, but I think my business is moving in a different direction." His cheeks reddened. "Of course. I just wanted to check." Grace watched him leave, then turned to me with a grin. "Is it petty if I say that felt good?" "Extremely." We laughed, really laughed, until my stomach hurt. As the afternoon settled into evening, the sun dipped low across the fields. Grandma headed inside to prepare dinner, leaving Grace and me to clean up. She stacked boxes while I organized shipping labels. At one point she paused, looking at me with something thoughtful in her eyes. "You know," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about what you said last week. What did I say?" "That you built all of this alone." I swallowed. "Yeah." She set the boxes down, her expression softening. "You don't have to anymore." Something in my chest opened like a window in a stuffy room, finally letting in air. "Grace," I began. "I'm not saying you need me," she added quickly. "But I'm here, like really here. Not because of Brandon, not because of your family, because I believe in you." I stared at her, unable to speak for a moment. There was no pity in her eyes, no need for validation or credit, just a quiet kind of faith in me that felt more real than anything I'd gotten from my own family. Before I could respond, footsteps crunched on the gravel again. Dad, Mom, and Brandon together this time. They looked calmer, more collected, almost hesitant. Dad cleared his throat. "Hazel, we'd like to help if you need it. No strings attached." Mom nodded. "Just support, even if that means staying out of the way." Brandon shoved his hands into his pockets. "And I can lift heavy boxes," he added, a sheepish smile tugging at his mouth. I wasn't ready to agree, but I wasn't ready to shut the door on them either, so I held my silence and let the moment breathe. "We'll figure it out," I said. "One step at a time." None of them pushed, and that alone felt like progress. As the sky darkened, everyone drifted inside Grandma. My parents, even Brandon, talking softly about dinner. Only Grace lingered beside me in the workshop doorway. "You okay?" she asked. I looked around the space, the jars glinting under the warm lights, the shelves filled to bursting the proof of everything I'd built with grit and sweat and stubborn hope, and felt something I hadn't felt before. "Yeah," I said. "For the first time, I think I am." Grace's smile widened. "Good, because tomorrow's going to be even bigger." The morning the September issue hit newsstands, the air felt different, as if the whole town was exhaling and holding its breath at the same time. I woke before my alarm sunlight stretching across my room in soft gold ribbons. For a moment, I lay there listening to the quiet pulse of the house. Grandma's footsteps moved gently downstairs, the kettle clicking on the day beginning like any other. Except nothing about today was ordinary. When I opened my phone, notifications burst across the screen in waves. Messages from customers, boutique owners, college friends I hadn't heard from in years, and even a few journalists hoping to schedule interviews. My face was everywhere, screenshots of the spread, reposted with captions filled with awe, curiosity, excitement. People were quoting lines from the article like it meant something to them. I walked downstairs feeling both lighter and heavier, as if my life had suddenly expanded, and I was learning how to breathe in the bigger space. Grandma stood at the stove flipping blueberry pancakes, humming to herself like this wasn't the day her granddaughter appeared in Vogue. "It's out," she said. "It's out," I echoed. She pressed a warm plate into my hands. "Eat first. Fame can wait." Before I could take a bite, Dad knocked on the back door. He stepped inside wearing an expression I'd never seen on him before. Pride quiet and unforced. "Your mother's out buying copies," he said. "3 of them." My laugh surprised both of us. A few minutes later, Brandon arrived with his usual dramatic flair, claiming he'd already been recognized around town. Then Grace appeared holding wildflowers. By noon, everyone ended up in the workshop, the heart of everything I'd built. Orders kept pouring in, customers, boutiques, journalists. My parents offered to help with logistics, packaging, lifting anything I needed. For the first time, they weren't trying to control me. They were trying to support me. Later that afternoon, after we'd packed boxes and organized shelves, we carried iced tea to the porch and spread the magazine open on the table. Grandma traced the headline with a soft finger. "You remind me of that wild violet," she told me, "the one that kept blooming through the stone walkway no matter what." Her words settled over me like a truth I'd been circling without naming. As the sun dipped low and everyone drifted inside, I stepped back into the workshop alone. The space glowed in the golden quiet jars, lined up with purpose herbs hanging to dry, the air sweet with rosemary and citrus. It felt like the room itself was exhaling with me. That night, after everyone went home and the workshop finally fell quiet, I stood alone in the doorway and let myself breathe. The September issue lay open on the table, the pages still smelling faintly of ink, my story printed there as if it had always belonged. I traced the headline with my fingertips, letting the weight of everything settle, the years of doubt, the whispered judgments, the moments when I almost walked away from the dream only I could see. For the first time, nothing about this success felt like a performance. It wasn't a shield. It wasn't proof. It wasn't a plea for anyone to understand me. It was simply mine. Something I built with my own hands, my own stubborn hope, my own quiet belief that I deserved a life shaped by my values rather than someone else's expectations. My phone buzzed with a photo from Grace, her holding the magazine in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other, grinning like she had just watched a friend step into her real life at last. A second later, another message, this one from Mom, asking when I might come by for dinner again. Then Brandon sending me a picture of a framed copy of the spread hanging in his hallway. They were all trying in their imperfect ways to meet me in the middle. I looked out across the fields, the fireflies blinking in the dusk, the workshop lights glowing warm against the early evening. It struck me how strange and beautiful life becomes when you stop chasing a version that pleases everyone else and start living the one that feels true. For years I thought success would feel like noise, applause, validation, being seen. But standing there with the magazine open beside me, I realized real success feels like alignment, like coming home to yourself after being gone for a long time. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to rewrite the version of yourself that others tried to hand you? Have you rebuilt your life on your own terms even when no one believed you could? Tell me your story in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, remember to like the video and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength, reclaiming your voice, and choosing yourself even when it isn't easy. Your moment is out there. I hope you run toward it.